November 12, 1942. A cold morning mist hung over Richmond, California, as a crowd gathered at the edge of San Francisco Bay. Before them stood a steel giant, 441 feet long, towering over the workers who had shaped it. This massive Liberty ship, freshly painted and gleaming under the weak winter sun, had not taken months to assemble. It had taken 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. A pace that defied every law of shipbuilding as the maritime world understood it. What once required entire seasons of labor had materialized in less than a workweek. America's industrial heartbeat was changing, and this ship was the proof. Just beyond the hull of the ship, soon to be known as the SS Robert E. Perry, stood more than 1,000 men and women. Not master shipwrights with decades of apprenticeship. Not craftsmen raised in old maritime towns. These were clerks, former farmers, housewives, and storekeepers who had learned welding only weeks earlier. Their hands were still rough from training, their skills freshly born. Yet together they had done what seasoned industry experts insisted could not be done. The shipyards had become the great equalizer, transforming ordinary Americans into the engine of an industrial revolution. Journalists, Navy officials, and skeptical owners of rival shipyards watched from the pier. Many came expecting an illusion, perhaps a shell of a ship, rushed and flawed, barely holding itself together. Instead, they saw a fully assembled vessel capable of loading cargo within days. Every rivet replaced by welded seams. Every compartment positioned with unprecedented precision. The old order felt something shift beneath their feet. A sense that a frontier in American manufacturing had just opened, one that could not be closed again. This moment had its roots 2 years earlier, December 27, 1940, when a man with no maritime background signed a contract that would change the world's industrial landscape. Henry J. Kaiser, a builder of dams, highways, and colossal infrastructure projects, had promised to deliver 30 cargo ships for the British. He had no shipyard, no trained workforce, no reputation in naval construction. Established builders mocked him as an overeager outsider who didn't know what he didn't know. Yet Kaiser's ignorance became his advantage. He carried no loyalty to old methods, no reverence for slow tradition, only a relentless belief that speed and innovation were non-negotiable. And now, as the SS Robert E. Perry prepared to slide into the bay, the world was about to witness the first undeniable proof that Kaiser's defiance of tradition wasn't luck. It was the blueprint of a manufacturing revolution that would soon consume the entire American shipbuilding industry. But how did Kaiser convince the government to trust him, an outsider over centuries of maritime expertise? The answer begins in the planning rooms where old-world tradition first collided with industrial innovation. When Henry Kaiser walked into the early 1941 planning meetings at Todd Shipyards in New York, he entered a world built on centuries of ritual. Naval architects, seasoned foremen, and engineering veterans eyed him with polite suspicion, an outsider wandering into a cathedral of tradition. Blueprints lined the walls like sacred texts, processes unchanged since before the American Revolution were treated as commandments. To these men, shipbuilding was not merely engineering. It was heritage, a craft honed over lifetimes. Kaiser, who had spent his career cracking mountains and directing dam crews, studied the room not with reverence, but with calculation. His chief engineer, Clay Bedford, had just returned from observing something that would become the seed of a revolution. In Detroit, Bedford had walked the Ford Motor Company's assembly lines, watching automobiles glide past workers who repeated their tasks with machine-like rhythm. Each station added a piece, a weld, a component, until a fully formed car rolled off the line. Bedford saw something shipbuilders had never considered seriously. Ships could be built the same way. Instead of slow, sequential construction, what if vessels were assembled in chunks, bow, stern, engine block, cargo holds, like giant mechanical puzzles? Traditional shipbuilders scoffed at the comparison. Ships were not cars. Ships required craftsmanship, precision, and years of apprenticeship. Riveting crews worked with perfect coordination, heating metal pins and hammering them through layers of steel. A skilled team could place perhaps 100 rivets a day, painstaking, deliberate, and honored by tradition. A Liberty ship required nearly 1 million rivets. To the old masters, this was the natural order of things. To Kaiser, it was evidence that the system was broken. Kaiser proposed a radical break. Eliminate riveting entirely. Replace it with electric arc welding, a method he had already perfected on pipelines stretching across the American West. Welding joined steel plates faster, cheaper, and with far fewer workers. But it also challenged decades of maritime doctrine. Vice Admiral Emory Land, head of the U.S. Maritime Commission, reviewed the proposal with caution bordering on disbelief. His private notes revealed the establishment's fear. Welding has never proven dependable on ship hulls of this scale. To rely on it would be gambling with the nation's lifeline. Yet beneath the skepticism lay desperation. Allied ships were sinking faster than conventional yards could replace them. With the Atlantic choked by U-boats and ship losses mounting, the government faced a grim truth. They had no choice but to gamble on the outsider. But once the contract was signed, Kaiser had to prove he could build an entire shipyard from nothing, and do it faster than anyone believed possible. What rose from the mudflats of California would stun the entire maritime world. In early 1941, the location chosen for Henry Kaiser's grand experiment hardly inspired confidence. Richmond, California, then little more than windswept mudflats and scattered warehouses, was expected to become the fastest shipbuilding complex in the world. Traditional engineers, invited to inspect the site, returned home shaking their heads. No seasoned shipbuilder would have chosen this place. Yet Kaiser wasn't designing a traditional shipyard. He was creating a manufacturing organism, optimized for speed, volume, and relentless motion. By the end of that same year, the transformation was unrecognizable. Using the same instincts that had carved highways through mountains and erected massive dams in the desert, Kaiser's crews built a shipyard unlike anything America had seen. Instead of long, linear building slips and massive gantry cranes, hallmarks of old shipyards, Richmond featured a layout inspired by automobile factories. Huge open prefab zones, parallel building ways, and rail lines crisscrossing like veins, designed to transport enormous steel sections wherever they were needed. It was messy to traditionalists, but perfect for the system Kaiser envisioned. Teams didn't build ships sequentially anymore, they built them simultaneously. Bow sections, stern assemblies, deck houses, and engine rooms were constructed in different corners of the yard at the same time, then transported and welded into place like colossal puzzle pieces. Veteran shipbuilders called it reckless. John Riley, a famed naval architect from Bethlehem Steel, toured Richmond in May 1941 and wrote an internal report dripping with frustration. Kaiser's cranes were absurdly excessive. His prefab areas were far too large. His building ways were too short. And yet, underneath the criticism, Riley admitted the uncomfortable truth. The yard was designed for one purpose, speed, and it succeeded. But the most radical change hadn't even arrived yet. The workers themselves. Instead of hiring old maritime families from the East Coast, Kaiser opened the doors to anyone with hands willing to work. Men from dust-choked farms, women from quiet offices, migrants from the South, and teenagers who had never seen the ocean. All answered the call. Kaiser didn't want experienced craftsmen. He wanted a workforce ready to learn and adapt. Tasks were broken down into simple, repeatable actions. With only 2 weeks of training, thousands of new workers could weld vertical seams or align metal plates with precision that rivaled lifelong professionals. The assembly line mentality had officially invaded shipbuilding. By late 1941, Richmond wasn't just producing ships, it was producing belief. A belief that the impossible timetable ahead might actually be achievable. But soon, the world would see something even more shocking. The first Liberty ships rolling out faster than anyone dared predict. The first ships took months. The next took weeks. But soon, the shipyard would break every expectation and ignite a competition that transformed the West Coast into a battleground of industrial speed. When the first Liberty ship emerged from Kaiser's newly born shipyard, even his supporters held their breath. It had taken 197 days, a respectable time for a facility built from nothing, but nowhere near the revolution Kaiser had promised. The skeptics pounced. "See?" they muttered in private reports. A dam builder cannot outpace a shipwright. But then came ship number 2, 169 days. Ship number 5, 128 days. By the time ship number 10 hit the water at 97 days, the murmurs grew uneasy. Something unprecedented was happening. Kaiser's learning curve wasn't gradual, it was vertical. By spring 1942, Richmond's output stunned the entire maritime establishment. Liberty ships, once thought impossible to build in less than 6 months, were now completed in an average of 70 days. Traditional shipyards, staffed by craftsmen with decades of lineage behind them, found themselves matched by housewives turned welders and farmers turned shipfitters. The old masters, steeped in centuries of sequential building methods, watched in disbelief as prefabrication eliminated bottlenecks that had limited ship production for generations. Kaiser's yards no longer built ships like monuments, they built them like machines. The true power of Kaiser's system lay in its parallelism. While one crew welded the skeletal framework of a hull, another installed engines in a separate workshop. Deck houses, cargo holds, crew quarters, all assembled independently, all progressing at once. When ready, enormous cranes dropped these massive components precisely into place. In traditional yards, installing a ship's engine took 3 cramped, painstaking weeks. At Richmond, crews built the entire assembly in 5 days and lowered it into a finished engine room in 8 hours. To seasoned maritime architects, it felt like sorcery. To Kaiser, it was simply engineering freed from tradition. As 1942 progressed, the shipyards on the West Coast began to echo with a competitive electricity. Kaiser's 7 facilities, 3 in the Pacific Northwest, 4 in California, were unofficially pitted against each other. Edgar Kaiser oversaw Oregon shipbuilding. Clay Bedford commanded Richmond. Both men were relentless, driven, and eager to outdo the other. Newspapers picked up on the rivalry, printing progress updates like sports scores. When Oregon produced the Joseph N. Teal in just 10 days, the public was stunned. Vice Admiral Howard Vickery, fearing a distraction, eventually ordered the speed competition to stop. But the damage, or rather the inspiration, was already done. Workers now believed speed had no limits. Yet even this astonishing progress was merely a prelude. A casual remark from a visiting admiral would soon ignite the most audacious challenge in shipbuilding history. One that would push Kaiser's methods, workers, and machines to the absolute edge. What followed was an attempt so bold that even Kaiser's allies doubted it. The promise to build an entire Liberty ship from keel to launch in under 10 days. And the ship chosen for this impossible feat would become legend. The spark came from a moment no one planned. During a routine tour of the Richmond yards in late 1942, Vice Admiral Emeryland casually told a group of reporters that while Liberty ship construction had improved remarkably, it still couldn't compare to the breathtaking speed of other American industries. His comment drifted through the shipyard like a challenge carried by the wind. Clay Bedford, Kaiser's fiercely ambitious superintendent at Richmond, heard it. And in that instant, Bedford decided the admiral's doubt would become the yard's next target. Within days, Bedford approached the Maritime Commission with a proposal so bold that it bordered on absurd. Richmond Yard No. 2 would attempt to build a complete Liberty ship, from the moment the keel touched the ways to its plunge into the bay, in less than 10 days. A feat twice as fast as the world's existing record. Skeptics whispered that Bedford had finally taken the competition too far. Even Kaiser, ever the visionary, hesitated before agreeing. But the war demanded speed, and the shipyard workers, already embracing an identity built on breaking limits, stood ready. The vessel chosen for this impossible mission was Hull 47, soon to be christened the SS Robert E. Peary. But what made this attempt even remotely feasible was that Kaiser's team had elevated prefab to its purest form. Before the first beam even touched the building ways, every major component of the Peary already existed. The bow, containing anchor systems, chain lockers, sleeping quarters, was finished. The stern, with its steering gear and propeller shaft, sat ready under canvas. For massive cargo holds stood waiting like steel monoliths. And the heart of the ship, the 140-ton triple expansion engine, had been built, mounted, and tested before ever arriving at Richmond. At 1 minute past midnight on November 8, 1942, the clock began. Floodlights bathed the yard in white fire as more than 1,000 workers rotated through tightly synchronized shifts. Welding arcs flashed across the night like blue lightning. Cranes groaned and swung, lifting entire sections as if stacking pieces of a titanic puzzle. The rhythm was relentless. By the fourth day, the hull was sealed, the engine room complete, the deckhouses attached, and every critical system installed. Crowds gathered along the fences, whispering in disbelief. They were going to do it. On November 12th, after only 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, the great ship slid into San Francisco Bay. But the true shock was still ahead because the Peary wasn't just launched. It was nearly ready for active duty, days from full delivery. The maritime world had never seen anything like it. But while speed was impressive, critics waited eagerly for the ship to fail. Surely a vessel built in days would crack, leak, or fall apart under stress. What happened next silenced them and reshaped global shipbuilding forever. When the SS Robert E. Peary hit the water, the applause was thunderous, but the skepticism was louder behind closed doors. Naval engineers, journalists, and rival shipyard executives had arrived expecting a half-finished novelty, a publicity stunt assembled too quickly to be seaworthy. They approached the freshly launched ship like doctors examining a patient they expected to find barely alive. But instead of warped beams, misaligned bulkheads, or structural sag, they found precision. Weld lines were straight, bulkheads were true, systems were installed, connected, and functional. The impossible ship was, in every meaningful way, real. Vice Admiral Emeryland, who had once doubted whether welded hulls could survive the open sea, stepped before the cameras with the weight of history on his shoulders. His remarks were brief but seismic. 6 months ago, he declared, I would have called this impossible. But today, traditional shipbuilding wisdom has been rewritten. Behind him, the Peary drifted in the water like a quiet rebuttal to every expert who had dismissed Kaiser's vision. With that public admission, the Maritime Commission issued a directive that would reshape every shipyard in America. All contractors were now required to adopt Kaiser's methods. The psychological shock within the old shipbuilding establishment was immediate. For generations, ship construction had been a protected craft, slow, methodical, rooted in tradition. Now, a group of untrained men and women on the West Coast were outproducing master craftsmen using techniques that, until recently, had been considered reckless. Engineers from prestigious yards in New York, Baltimore, and the Gulf Coast were quietly dispatched to Richmond to study what had happened. Memos written by executives who once mocked Kaiser now read like confessions. Kaiser has achieved the impossible by discarding limitations we accepted as absolute. The era of generational shipwright guilds was collapsing. And while the industry grappled with this new reality, Kaiser's yards only grew stronger. By early 1943, 18 American shipyards were using prefabrication, welding, and parallel production. National output skyrocketed. Liberty ship construction had fallen from 230 days on average in 1941 to 42 days by mid-1943. America was now launching 3 ships per day, more tonnage than German submarines could sink. The balance of the war, once teetering in the Atlantic, began to shift. The U-boat strategy relied on destroying Allied lifelines faster than they could be replaced. But now the math favored the Allies. Still, the most astonishing part of the story wasn't steel, welding, or speed. It was the workforce behind it. Tens of thousands of untrained Americans who would soon rewrite not just industrial history, but social history as well. Because what happened next? An industrial army of women, minorities, migrants, and first-time workers would demolish centuries of assumptions about who was qualified to build the engines of victory. By 1943, the most revolutionary force in Henry Kaiser's shipyards wasn't steel or welding. It was the people. For the first time in American industrial history, tens of thousands of workers came from backgrounds the old maritime world had never imagined suitable for shipbuilding. Housewives who had never held a torch became expert welders. Former farmhands mastered crane operations. African American laborers, long denied skilled positions, were now fitters, riggers, and supervisors. And women, once restricted to clerical roles, were now the backbone of the production line. Kaiser's workforce wasn't just building ships. They were rebuilding America's belief in who could master complex industries. Richmond became a social experiment on a scale the nation had never attempted. In 1940, it was a quiet town of 23,000. By 1943, it had exploded to more than 100,000 residents, its streets buzzing day and night with workers from every corner of the country. Meanwhile, in Oregon, Kaiser built an entire new city, Vanport, where over 40,000 people lived, most employed in shipyard work. These cities weren't temporary camps. They were fully realized communities with schools, libraries, theaters, and hospitals. As America fought a war overseas, Kaiser was quietly reshaping its social fabric at home. But Kaiser's emphasis on people went far deeper than recruitment. He understood something no shipyard before him had embraced. Healthy workers build faster. To support his massive labor force, he partnered with Dr. Sidney Garfield to create a groundbreaking prepaid medical system. Workers paid small monthly fees, and in return received full medical care, preventive checkups, and emergency treatment. What began as a practical wartime necessity evolved into a healthcare model that still exists today. Kaiser Permanente, now one of the largest health systems in the United States. A wartime shipyard accidentally gave birth to a healthcare revolution. What the old shipbuilding guilds missed, and what Kaiser understood instinctively, was that skill is not inherited. It is taught, and so thousands of men and women learned specialized tasks in a matter of weeks. 2-week welding courses, 1-month ship-fitting programs, 6-week crane training. The assembly line philosophy turned complex craftsmanship into repeatable, teachable precision, and in doing so, proved a truth the old world refused to accept. Ordinary people can achieve extraordinary production when given the chance. By 1944, Kaiser's 7 shipyards employed nearly 200,000 workers, including more than 40,000 women and tens of thousands of minority laborers. They weren't just producing ships. They were producing a new America. But the ships themselves were about to prove something even more shocking, that vessels built in days, not months, could survive the brutal tests of war. Next, we uncover the truth critics were waiting for. Would these fast-built ships break apart? Or would they endure the unforgiving battlefield of the Atlantic and Pacific? The answer stunned the world. As Liberty ships poured from American shipyards, critics waited eagerly for failure. They argued that vessels built in weeks or days could not possibly endure the savage conditions of wartime oceans. Atlantic storms ripped steel apart. U-boats stalked convoys like wolves. Temperatures plunging below zero tested every weld, every seam, every joint. If Kaiser's ships were the fragile creation skeptics believed, they would crack open like eggs under pressure. But when the first Liberty ships sailed into convoy duty, the world witnessed something astonishing. They held. In the brutal gauntlet of the North Atlantic, with submarines lurking beneath and Luftwaffe aircraft roaring overhead, Liberty ships proved far more durable than predicted. Out of 2,710 vessels built, about 200 were lost to enemy action, a rate consistent with pre-war merchant losses. Welded hulls, though controversial, demonstrated remarkable resilience. Yes, there were failures. Some ships developed brittle fractures, cold weather cracks that ran along welded seams. A tiny handful, just 3 ships, broke completely in half. But engineers quickly identified the cause: impurities in specific batches of steel, not the welding methods themselves. By 1944, revised standards had nearly eliminated the issue. And while critics focused on flaws, the ships themselves were busy proving their worth. Liberty ships delivered tanks, trucks, ammunition, grain, vehicles, millions of tons of material that sustained the Allied war effort. A single ship could transport 2,840 jeeps, 440 tanks, or 230 million rounds of ammunition. They were not glamorous vessels. They were not fast. But they were dependable. Their triple expansion steam engines, outdated but easy to build, pushed them along at a steady 11 knots, enough to keep pace in convoy columns. Liberty ships were not built to win beauty contests. They were built to win wars. Perhaps the greatest testament to their durability came not during the war, but decades after. Ships designed to last 5 years stubbornly refused to die. Many Liberty ships sailed into the 1960s and 70s under foreign flags. Some found second lives as cargo carriers, storage hulks, or fishing platforms. A few, like the SS John W. Brown and SS Jeremiah O'Brien, survive today as museum ships. The O'Brien even steamed across the Atlantic in 1994 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of D-Day, an 82-year-old welded vessel proving its strength half a century after skeptics declared such ships unsafe. War had tested Kaiser's ships. The Atlantic had tested them. Time itself had tested them. And still, Liberty ships endured. But the story didn't end with victory, because the techniques born in wartime shipyards would soon reshape global industry for generations. Next comes the legacy. How Kaiser's wartime revolution spread across oceans, reshaped nations, and permanently changed how the modern world builds everything, from ships to skyscrapers. When the war ended in 1945, many expected Kaiser's empire of shipyards to fade into silence. After all, Liberty ships were emergency vessels, built for a moment of crisis. Production shut down almost overnight. Richmond, once roaring with 100,000 workers, fell quiet by spring 1946. Oregon's Vanport City, once the second-largest community in the state, emptied rapidly. On the surface, it looked like Kaiser's methods might be relegated to wartime memory. But underneath that stillness, something profound had happened. The world had witnessed what industrial reinvention looked like, and there was no going back. The innovations born in Kaiser's shipyards radiated across the globe. Japan, rebuilding from devastation, studied the Liberty ship program intensely. Its shipyards in Nagasaki and Kure adopted Kaiser-style prefabrication and welding, reducing build times dramatically. South Korea followed suit in the 1960s, constructing enormous modern shipyards in Ulsan, today among the largest on Earth. The very techniques dismissed by American traditionalists in 1941 became the foundation of the world's most dominant shipbuilding nations. Wherever massive ships rise now, tankers, container vessels, cruise liners, the fingerprints of Kaiser's methods remain. Back home, the ripple effect spread into every corner of American industry. The welding techniques refined under wartime pressure became standard in skyscraper construction, refinery equipment, and bridges. Prefabrication revolutionized housing projects, industrial buildings, and infrastructure. The principles of parallel production, tasks divided, sequenced, and executed simultaneously, became core teachings in industrial engineering programs nationwide. Dozens of business schools began using the Liberty Ship program as a case study, arguing that the real resource in war wasn't steel or labor, it was the ability to reorganize thinking. Even more significant was the transformation of American mindset. Before the Liberty ships, industry leaders believed that complex products required slow craftsmanship, long apprenticeships, and strict adherence to tradition. After Kaiser, those assumptions collapsed. Suddenly, the idea that it can't be done lost its authority. The United States entered the war barely able to build merchant ships. Within 2 years, it outproduced every other nation combined. Harvard's Michael Porter later called it proof that industrial capability is not fixed. It is created. In other words, the limits were never physical. They were mental. But the story still wasn't finished. Because behind every innovation, beyond every assembly line and weld, stood the ordinary workers whose hands made the revolution real. Their legacy would echo long after the last Liberty ship left service. In the final chapter, we explore the human legacy of Kaiser's revolution and how ordinary Americans, once written off as unskilled, became the architects of a new industrial age. Long after the last Liberty ship launched, long after the shipyards fell quiet and the torches cooled, the true legacy of Henry Kaiser lived on, not in steel, but in the people who built those ships. Tens of thousands of Americans who had arrived at the shipyards with no experience left with skills, confidence, and a new understanding of their own potential. Women who stepped into welding booths for the first time went on to become machinists, builders, and business owners. African American workers who had once been relegated to the hardest labor now held skilled industrial jobs across the nation. Kaiser didn't just challenge shipbuilding traditions, he challenged the boundaries of opportunity itself. Many of those workers carried what they learned into the booming post-war economy. The precision developed in welding Liberty ship seams became the same precision used in aircraft factories, automobile plants, and construction companies. Veterans of Kaiser's yards helped build highways, refineries, skyscrapers, and ports. Their hands, once trained in 6-week shipyard crash courses, now shaped the infrastructure of an American century. Whole families rose out of poverty because of skills gained in Richmond or Portland. For many, the shipyards weren't just a workplace. They were a doorway into a future once thought unreachable. Even the ships themselves refused to fade quietly into history. Hundreds continued to serve well into the 1960s and 70s. Some became floating warehouses. Others became fishing platforms. One, the Star of Kodiak, still stands today as the headquarters of Trident Seafoods in Alaska, a Liberty ship frozen in time, landlocked but unbowed, and 3 Liberty ships survive as museums: the SS John W. Brown, the SS Hellespont Liberty, and the celebrated SS Jeremiah O'Brien, which still sails under its own power at more than 80 years old. These ships, built by untrained hands in days, not months, remain living reminders that the impossible can be achieved when people refuse to accept limits. Historians often say that the war was won on the beaches of Normandy, in the skies over the Pacific, and across the deserts of North Africa. But Admiral Chester Nimitz offered another truth. We fought across 5,000 miles of ocean because ships could be built faster than the enemy could sink them. The Liberty ships were more than cargo carriers. They were an industrial strategy made real. Every ship sliding down the rails was a message. America will outproduce you. And the workers who made that promise real were not master craftsmen. They were ordinary citizens who answered a call and built a fleet that fed armies, fueled invasions, and changed history. In the end, Henry Kaiser's revolution wasn't about breaking speed records or humiliating traditional shipyards. It was about redefining what human beings are capable of when they are trusted, trained, and unleashed from the weight of old assumptions. The Liberty ships are mostly gone now, rusting beneath foreign waves or preserved in quiet harbors. But their true cargo was never measured in tons. It was measured in transformation, the transformation of industry, of opportunity, and of belief. And that legacy still sails with us today. Every time someone looks at an impossible task and says, "Why not?"